Every hit game on the original Nintendo needed to have some kind of accompanying spin-off on Nintendo's Game Boy. Released in 1989, the Game Boy was a landmark piece of handheld gaming history, selling over 100 million units and having an incredibly large library of games. Obviously, the Game Boy is a product that is before my time, as my first gaming device was the Game Boy Advance in the early 2000s, so I never owned an original Game Boy. Perhaps I'll add one to my collection at some point in the future. But that day is not today. What was so cool about the Game Boy back in the late 80s and early 90s is that you had all these games that were of comparable quality to the games on the NES. Game Boy games were not as fast, didn't have as much screen real estate, didn't have color and all that, and you needed batteries to power the thing. But if you have played, say, Super Mario Bros. On NES, then Super Mario Land will feel pretty similar. As any viewer of this channel would know, Mega Man received a whopping 6 games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, so obviously Capcom wasn't going to leave the Game Boy dry in terms of Mega Man content. The console had 5 whole Mega Man games released for it, and we're going to talk about all 5 of them right now. Starting with the first one. In Japan, these games were simply known as Rockman World 1 through 5. That's an easy way to distinguish them from Mega Man's 1 through 5 on consoles. In fact, fans often refer to these as the Mega Man World series, but that was not the name used in the West. The first game is called Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, and then the 4 sequels were just Mega Man with a Roman numeral. I suppose that would distinguish these games somewhat from the console versions, though those versions used Roman numerals in the title screens anyway. So this just kinda adds to the confusion of Mega Man International releases. In Japan, all 5 games got great-looking key art from the artists that drew for the other games, but in Europe, Mega Man has silver armor, which is super off-model, but besides that, it looks fine. The only thing that's goofy about it is that they didn't even try with the logo. It just says Dr. Wily's Revenge in italics. For the US, Dr. Wily's Revenge just uses a close-up of that horrifying Mega Man pose from the Mega Man 3 box art where he just looks terrifying. As I said in the Mega Man 3 video, I really don't know what this facial expression is trying to convey. But then the other games got more unique art in the US, and I like the style. Mega Man doesn't look scary and has a sort of charm to his design, since he looks like Mega Man, but has that 90s US comic book superhero vibe. And as the games go along, you can see the art just looking more and more like the original Japanese art style, showing how in the US they just went from doing totally original art to just using the same stuff by Mega Man 8. It's neat. The Game Boy Mega Man games were not developed in-house at Capcom. Instead, the first, third, fourth, and fifth ones were outsourced and developed by Minakuchi Engineering. The team behind it were big Mega Man fans anyway, so it all worked out. Fun fact, this was the team that later developed Mega Man X3 on the Super Nintendo, one of my favorite games of all time, alongside the first 2 X games and the 4th one. So, they're good in my book. But how were these Game Boy games when you replay them in 2024? Let's find out by taking a look at Dr. Wily's Revenge. The name is fitting because that's pretty much all you need to know to understand the plot, with massive air quotes around it. The back of the box reads, "They're alive and they're ripping up the town. The insane industrial wizard Dr. Wily has revived 8 of his robot masters in another try at taking over the world. Dr. Wily's really raving this time and hides behind terrifying tons of mechanized maniacs. Yikes, Mega Man. This one's a close shave." Yeah, so basically Dr. Wily's back with the old robot masters and wants to kill Mega Man. The bosses are all returning characters from Mega Man 1 and 2 on the NES. Though, technically, the bosses from Mega Man 1 were not created by Dr. Wily, but I doubt the people writing the back of the box of this game really cared to consult the lore book first. While the box says there are only 8 returning robot masters, that does not mean there are 8 levels. When you start, the stage select shows Iceman, Elecman, Fireman, and Cutman from Mega Man 1, and those are the only levels in the game before the Wily Fortress. Props to Dr. Wily's Revenge, the level design is all original. To be honest, I was fully expecting this game to just take the original levels and find a way to condense them onto the Game Boy. I've never played this game before, so I was just expecting it to be like the Mega Man X Game Boy Color games that I have played, which reused old levels for the most part. But no, this game was original in its stage design. Not that these layouts were breaking the bank, it's a series of pretty standard jumps, but what makes it really challenging is that the screen space is pretty small. Mega Man takes up a lot of the screen, and so do the enemies, so you won't really feel like you have a lot of space to move around. Which makes levels that aren't that big feel a lot bigger than they are. Plus, your movement's pretty slow, so the levels feel more perilous than they would in a faster-paced game like Mega Man 2. I thought that Iceman and Cutman stages were simple to get through, but the other two were much more difficult. I decided to start with a Lekman stage, and like the original from Mega Man 1, you spend most of it climbing up. But it's brutal because of how much of it revolved around disappearing and reappearing blocks, and falling would send you back several screens. And then the Magma and Fireman stage was an instant kill, so both those levels were tough as hell, but the other two were comparatively easy, to the point where I didn't really remember them much at all before consulting a stage map to refresh my memory. What every stage has going against it is that the checkpoints felt pretty punishing throughout. I guess this was another way of them making up for having short levels. Dying comes at a high price, and then a game over sends you back to the start, as you'd expect. But then, mercifully, the bosses were easy. Really easy, in fact. I started with a Lekman because I wanted the Thunder Beam as soon as possible, but I was surprised to see that the boss fight wasn't a fraction as difficult as the original since he barely tried to hit me. So I easily beat him, and then every boss weakness shredded through the health bars. Not that I was complaining, it just wasn't what I was expecting. I did not vibe with the final levels, though. The first one has all kinds of moments I didn't like, such as these jumping mechs with an inconsistent jump height. It felt pretty random if I was going to get through it without damage. And then other rooms have you jump down and oops, there were spikes there. What an idiot I was for my inability to predict that. But to give credit to the first of the final levels, the boss rush does not involve refights against the already defeated bosses. Instead, this is where the Mega Man 2 Robot Masters are kept. You battle Flashman, Heatman, Bubbleman, and Quickman. Flashman is weak to the Ice Slasher, which you got in the main levels, but then there's a new chain of weaknesses here because each Mega Man 2 Robot Master defeated unlocks their weapon. They've never done a boss rush like this, so I commend it. After that, you battle Anchor, the first in a new line of mechs called the Mega Man Killers, but he gets defeated pretty easily. The final level felt like an everything plus the kitchen sink gauntlet. I was dying left and right here, because I was trying to get through it quickly, but it felt like every obstacle in the game was trying to get you at once. You just gotta take it slow. The final boss was thankfully easy, though. The first phase is weak to the Atomic Fire from Heatman, and the second phase is weak to the Mirror Buster from Anchor. You just have to stand close to the mech, so that when this face thing comes after you, you'll have room to run away and dodge. And then just stand there with the Mirror Buster and you'll clear Wily in no time. As Mega Man returns home, the end. Dr. Wily's Revenge is exactly what you'd expect from a Game Boy Mega Man game. It looks like Mega Man, plays like Mega Man, it's just not as good as the console versions. And it wasn't meant to be, it was the handheld alternative. But it's got everything like upgrades and selectable Robot Masters and nice Game Boy remixes of classic tunes. It's not really doing anything wrong, but you wouldn't be missing anything by not playing it. It's the most 5 out of 10 game you'll ever play. Impressive for its time, but does not really achieve anything beyond that for a player in 2024. As I alluded to earlier, Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy was not developed by Minakuchi Engineering. Instead, it was developed by a company called Biox, and evidently Keiji Inafune, Mega Man series producer, didn't think their work was very good on this one. However, I'm down to give it a shot and see what the game's all about. The back of the box reads, "It's Quentin time. The demented Dr. Wily is at it again! This time he's stolen the experimental time skimmer and skipped into the future. But wait! 4 of his strongest cyborgs have been left behind to squash the mighty Mega Man. Time is of the essence as Mega Man and Rush blast past waves of maniacal metal monsters on the way to the underground lair of Dr. Wily. Once there, they must face Quint, the ferocious fiend from the future." So clearly, this one has higher stakes. Not that you get any of that by playing the game. There's no dialogue to speak of. You just hit start in the title screen and get to pick 4 bosses from Mega Man 2. Metal Man, Airman, Crashman, and Woodman, and then proceed to the final area. For some reason, I was expecting this game to be really difficult, and starting with Metal Man didn't help dissuade this assumption. Mainly because I jumped into the bottom of the screen and got hit by spikes. You know, what an idiot I am and all that good stuff. But past this part, the game gave me almost no trouble. As you might expect, the reason I picked Metal Man first is because I wanted his weapon, the Metal Blades, and wanted to use them to make short work of the game, and it did not disappoint. The Metal Blades are debatably more OP in this game than they were in the NES Mega Man 2. It works with the same rules where it takes 4 shots to use up 1 energy bar. But now you can fire the Metal Blades while on the move, when the console version locked you in place when firing the blades. Sometimes it could be a detriment, like an Airman stage where I wanted to fire at the cloud enemies, but moving and shooting the Metal Blades led to my death on such tiny platforms, but in basically every other situation it made the game way easier. This game adds some mechanics from the Mega Man sequels. Sliding through narrow gaps is in this game, as is Rush. You can use the Rush Coil, Rush Jet, and Rush Marine like in Mega Man 3, and they totally break the game. Anytime there's water with some seemingly difficult platforming section attached to it, you can effortlessly cheese it with the Rush Marine. E-tanks are in this game too, so if you thought bosses weren't easy enough with their weaknesses, you have a safety net of restoring all your health to max. Lives and E-tanks are both in regular supply. Going into the final boss, I had 4 E-tanks and 7 lives. I was actually quite surprised by how simple this game was to get through. On paper, Dr. Wily's Revenge should have been easy as well, but the game kinda kicked my butt at the end. It took me 90 minutes to beat that game, and this one took me 45 minutes and has like double the level count. There are only 2 fortress levels, and neither one's that complex, but when you get to the boss rush room, things got pretty interesting. Like Dr. Wily's Revenge, this part has you fight bosses from Mega Man 3 instead of refighting the Mega Man 2 battles you've already conquered. But the gimmick is that these warp rooms don't take you to the boss, they take you to the stage, so you have to play through a new level based on Needle Man, Magnet Man, Hard Man, and Top Man stages, getting their weapons and then using them against each other. Only on one shared ammo pool, but weapon energy is very frequently dropped in this game, so it didn't present an issue. Especially because I was just spamming the metal blades anyway. But hey, credit to Mega Man 2 and the Game Boy, it does not have a boss rush. I think the devs of this game were obviously anticipating my criticisms decades in advance, and then made a game just for me. But seriously though, there isn't much to say here. I don't even mean any of this to say that the game is bad. Far from it. I think it's alright. I was just surprised by how easy it was. I kind of have this mindset that a Game Boy game is likely to be super challenging, but not in this case. The game ends in a battle with Quint, the new metal menace Mega Man must face. But the twist here is that the lore is pretty interesting. As the US box art glossed over, this game involves Dr. Wily stealing a time machine called the Time Skimmer. He uses it to go to the future and find some peaceful utopia where Wily is reformed and Mega Man is depowered because there's no conflict. Wily convinces his future self to seize this chance to capture depowered Rock and turn him over to their side and take over the world, and that would be Quint. Mega Man from the present day must defeat his future self, who, for some reason, primarily battles on a pogo stick. Mega Man then defeats Dr. Wily here and goes back to the present, effectively erasing this new peaceful utopian timeline from ever existing, paving the way for the classic Mega Man sequels and the Mega Man X series and all that and beyond. That lore is pretty interesting, but as I said up top, it's from a game that's utterly forgettable. It has no story inside of the game, and the gameplay is basically what you'd expect from a sequel to Dr. Wily's Revenge. It plays like that game, but with more features from later games added in. The levels were alright, albeit nothing special. It's just another product of its time. Though, for what it's worth, I'd rather replay this over Dr. Wily's Revenge. It being so easy made it a game I enjoyed much more than the kind of difficult campaign from the first game. So I'd give it around a 5 out of 10 from a 2024 perspective, but I enjoyed it more than the first one. So now, let's check out Mega Man 3 for the Game Boy. The sinister scientist Dr. Wily is at it again. Now, he and his renegade robots have purloined an offshore oil rig and are drilling through the Earth's crust. It's up to Mega Man to shut down their scheme before Wily can harness the molten power of the Earth's core to fuel his latest metallic monstrosity. Join Mega Man, Rush, and Flip Top. After one Google search, I realized this was referring to Eddie, who appears in this game, but I got pretty confused by the name alteration. But yeah, that should be the gist of the story, right? Well, not really. The game contains no story, just like the previous entries, so you have to consult external media like the box and the manual. But looking at the Mega Man wiki, evidently the English story about an offshore oil rig was completely made up, since the Japanese story is about Wily causing weather problems that cause robots to rampage. I don't know why they'd go to such lengths to make up a new story when there was one already written in the Japanese manual, and then in-game the story doesn't even exist anyway. But hey, I'm not a 90s US games localizer, what do I know? Mega Man 3 on the Game Boy was a step up in many ways. Now that the game is using bosses from Mega Man's 3 and 4, the levels have become more detailed to match their original incarnations. Snake Man is a stage in this game, and I think the Game Boy version does a really solid job maintaining the visuals from the NES version, just obviously in black and white. I like the stage select screen, how they do a transition between picking the Robot Master and their little intro scene. The music is decent as well. I'd rather listen to the NES tracks these were based on, but it sounds good. Much better than Part 2, especially with its high-pitched music. I think this game shows that the team was getting better with the Game Boy hardware, and you love to see it. In the early levels, I thought this game was much better paced than its predecessors. Dr. Wily's Revenge is a bit too hard at times, and 2 was really easy. But this game gave Mega Man the right amount of mobility with the slide and the charge shot lifted from Mega Man 4, to where you feel like you can tackle any threat, but then the level design provided challenge too. Each level's going to test different skills, like how Snake Man has these bits on the ground going up and down, and how Shadow Man stage has the timed explosives thing you need to avoid, and the bit where the room gets the lights shut off. Gemini Man stage borrowing the gimmick from the original where you shoot these pod things to give yourself something to slide through to progress forward. In 4 levels, a decent amount of skills are tested. You get E-tanks like the second game, but as I said, this game is just better balanced to where you might actually end up needing them. The Robot Master bosses were still pretty damn easy though. Snake Man was hard as hell in the original Mega Man 3, but now with the charge shot and with how much more damage bosses take from your attacks, he's really no problem. And when you have the weaknesses for the rest, your victory is all but guaranteed. But since it's quick, I can't even complain. Once you get to the halfway point, you then need to battle 4 Robot Masters from Mega Man 4. Though there's no special gimmick here like Mega Man 2 on Game Boy, it's just 4 more levels on the stage select screen like Mega Man's 7 and 8. In those games, I thought it was nice to have 4 easier levels and then 4 more difficult ones to test your skills. It's the same idea here, but holy moly, these levels were really tough. I spent like 22 minutes on Dustman stage because it was relentless. Enemies were flying out from pits, crushing segments with no remorse, enemies hit like a truck, and the list goes on. I had every kind of ass-kicking obstacle hit me here, and a really pitiful amount of checkpoints to boot. Which goes for all of the Mega Man 4 stages. They are not screwing around. If you want to get through this, you're going to have to demonstrate some real skill with the mechanics and exercise a lot of patience. And I felt like they were all like this. Dive Man was another example since it was littered with spikes and had multiple mini-bosses. The back half of this game was definitely a difficulty spike. It was not undoable, but it was much harder than the earlier levels for sure. Then you have to beat the second in the line of Mega Man killers. This one's called Punk. The name is apt because he kills Mega Man in 3 hits, no exceptions. You need to time your attacks so that they won't be deflected and hopefully react fast enough when he dashes towards you. You either need to slide under him or jump over him depending on his angle, so it's tricky. But then the final level was also a really brutal gauntlet since it has 3 bosses and not a lot of checkpoints. Once you get to grips with the pattern for Wily's machines, it goes alright, but it can be a bit of a learning curve, especially when using Punk's weapon on the second phase. It kept getting blocked, and I thought I was toast for sure. But I beat the game and saw the ending where Mega Man saves the day and Wily escapes, yet again. While I was just complaining about the game being brutal, that certainly doesn't make it bad by any means. On the contrary, I thought this game was alright. More alright than the previous 2, in fact. Its increase in production values and new moves from Mega Man made me think this was more of a 6 out of 10. If you want a retro platformer, I don't think you could go wrong playing this on your Switch, even if it's not a must-play by any means. So that's another game down, and we have 2 to go. So how is Mega Man 4 for the Game Boy? Invasion of the Robot Snatchers! A huge celebration at the World Robot Expo is shattered by the sight of a flying saucer streaking across the sky. But instead of holding little green men, this saucer holds one very mad scientist. Armed with a mind control machine that transmits a sinister signal, Dr. Wily is ready to mesmerize all the robots of the city into an army of mindless, metallic mercenaries. Thankfully, that actually is the story of the game this time around, but I just love how cheesy these box descriptions are. Mega Man 4 on the Game Boy is a huge step up in a variety of ways. First, with the production values. This game has cutscenes and dialogue. Not too much to where it gets in the way of being a Game Boy platformer, but enough to where you have a slight idea about what's going on. If you wait on the title screen, you get a kind of cool opening cutscene establishing Wily's back with returning Robot Masters and how Mega Man is going to face off against another Mega Man killer called Ballad. These games were improving with each one, and these cutscenes are another example. Mechanically, it's very similar to the previous games, but I thought everything felt better. Controls felt a little faster and more responsive than the previous games, as I just thought this one felt better to play and had even stronger level design as you run through Toadman, Brightman, Pharaoh Man, and Ringman stages. As you should expect, all of these levels are done from scratch and contain segments that will remind you of the NES original but are not one-to-one. Brightman stage in particular had some cool gimmicks, like the part where you have to shut off the lights in order to see the platforms but nothing else in the room, or in Pharaoh Man stage with these crumbling platforms that will only fall a little bit at a time, so you have multiple chances to jump on and off of them. The charge shot was added in the third Game Boy game, but it was the one from the console Mega Man 4. The console Mega Man 5 made the charge shot more powerful, and so Game Boy 4 does the same. It's bigger, but comes with this strange setback where Mega Man gets pushed back when firing it. It makes sense if the attack has that much kick, but it's the only Mega Man game that's ever done that to my recollection. But hey, at least you can take damage and not lose your charge shot. This game has that over Mega Man 5. Though, Like Mega Man 5, such a powerful charge shot really makes the special weapons feel pretty redundant. Even the weapons from Mega Man 4 went largely unused in this playthrough because the Mega Buster was just that powerful. Another thing this game has in common with Mega Man 5, though, is a focus on exploration. Levels have different paths that hide secrets like extra lives and such, but also a new currency called P-Chips. You can bring these to Dr. Light's lab and have him build you E-Tanks or weapon energy tanks or extra lives or the energy balancer. It works exactly like the system in Mega Man 7. Well, actually, this game released years before Mega Man 7, so I guess it's the other way around. But in the stages, you can find letters that spell beat. Once you get all 4 of them, you can use beat to attack enemies. But like Mega Man 5, I barely ever used this. After you beat 4 levels, you get a cutscene of a Wily battle tank rising, and Mega Man's doing damage to it from like 100 yards away, so I guess that's how powerful Mega Man is. You get up close and destroy an eye thing before going inside to fight Ballad the first time, but he escapes before getting destroyed. The fight was pretty easy though. I only had to use 1 E-Tank because I already had low health from the previous fight. You then have to battle through 4 more levels, this time from Mega Man 5. Charge Man, Stone Man, Crystal Man, and Napalm Man. I was kinda nervous here after how much of a difficulty spike the back half of Mega Man Game Boy 3 was, but this was nowhere near as hard. Maybe because these levels were from Mega Man 5, a super easy game, but besides Crystal Man, I got through all of them without much hassle. I thought a lot of these levels were fun. Napalm Man especially is the most open level in the Game Boy series thus far and had a lot of cool challenges with these spike drill things. The level just executes the principles of Mega Man really well, mainly patience and observation. Crystal Man only gave me shit because I lacked the ability to be patient while crystals fell from the sky. That's the same pitfall that got me killed over and over in the original Mega Man 5 as well. What you're going to want to look out for in the second half of the game are the letters that spell out Wily. These are required to enter the final level, but they're all in pretty easy to find spots. Just figured I'd mention they're required. The final levels are a blur in my mind though. You fight Ballad and have to escape a crumbling room with these bombs in your way. It's a timed puzzle where you need to destroy them to get through. That was neat. And then there was a pretty quick second to last stage that was a straight line, and then a final gauntlet stage with boss fights, with an unfortunate return of the boss rush as well, and then a 3-phase final fight with Wily. And I have no idea how you even dodged this charge attack, I just kept shooting until I won. Ending Mega Man Game Boy 4 with Wily's inevitable defeat and escape, while Mega Man sees Ballad sacrifice himself to save the day. In the end, I thought, that was a nice Game Boy platformer. It still has issues like not a lot of checkpoints and inconsistent difficulty, but as far as Game Boy platformers go, this game's pretty cool. It's got a shop system, it has exploration, it has diverse boss fights and well-designed levels. It's a good game. Once more, I'm not saying you should drop everything to play it, but it's a good game. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. So once more, this series is trending up, which only leaves one more, Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy. But what makes this one special is that it's not built on recycled content from the NES games. It's totally original and is a fan favorite amongst the more obscure Mega Man entries. As is the case for all of these games, I've never played it before, so let's see what it has to offer. From the cosmic reaches of outer space comes mankind's greatest threat. Hordes of alien robots have swarmed down from the heavens, and all of the Earth's weapons are powerless to stop their ravenous rampage. Now, the only hope to stop these alien invaders lies with one man, Mega Man! So yeah, this one's a little more original compared to the rest. You don't even need the box to tell you what the story is this time because the game does it in the intro cutscene. Mega Man is on a walk with Roll until the first in a line of mechs called Star Droids attacks him. His name is Terra and he's out to defeat Mega Man. Mega Man's weapons have no effect on him. So Dr. Light modifies Mega Man's Buster with a rocket punch, and this will really make the difference. 4 of the Star Droids attack Earth, so you need to defeat them, and then venture out into outer space to defeat the rest, and Terra, and of course, Dr. Wily. What's unique about Mega Man V is that it was compatible with the Super Game Boy. The footage for the previous games shows they were all black and white. Mega Man V would have been like that if it was played on a regular Game Boy, but the Super Game Boy was a device for the Super Nintendo that allows you to play Game Boy games on the TV. Some games like Metroid 2 Return of Samus had special color palettes that only worked if you played it on the Super Game Boy. Mega Man V was one of those games. It's not much compared to, say, a Game Boy Color game, but it does break up the visual monotony compared to the previous games. It helps as you see all kinds of new assets and enemies in this. This game gets several pages dedicated to it in the classic Mega Man art book, while the previous games got less coverage because of just how much more new art was in this one. The first 4 bosses you face are mechs that go by Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Neptune. You can see with that alone they're going way past series conventions with the boss names and design, and then the level design is naturally completely original. All the Game Boy Mega Man games feature original level design. I said this about Dr. Wily's Revenge, but the difference is that the levels from the first 4 games were all based on levels from the NES Mega Man games. So there was always something to compare it to. And the music could never stand out on its own because it just reused composition from the NES games. Even if Mega Man V didn't have good levels, it would automatically be more worth playing than any of the previous games because it was original. This is the perk of fully original content in an ongoing series. If there's no exact source to compare the levels to, they'll be more stand out. But that's the great thing about this game. It's worth playing because it's new content, but that content is also enjoyable. This is the most responsive Mega Man has felt to play on the Game Boy, and the level design is good. It's still a Game Boy game in that it's not going to blow your mind with its awe-inspiring complexity, but I enjoyed seeing the different space themes and design ideas. Doing things that none of the other games have done before, like a room with these bubbles on the ground where you need to control your movement to not jump too high or too low. Or this room that has increased and decreased gravity and then switches between the two rapidly. The game just provided challenges that felt fresh, even to me, someone who's played just about every Mega Man platformer at this point. The game is structured like 3 and 4, where you get 4 more bosses after the halfway point: Jupiter, Saturn, the funny name one, and Pluto. This was made back when that was still considered a planet. The difficulty balancing across all 8 stages, like Game Boy 4, was pretty consistent. The later levels provided more of a challenge, but not to an unreasonable extent. This game took me a lot longer to beat than the previous ones, clocking in at around 3 hours, and I think its percentage of original content is why. I had to learn new bosses and level design tropes compared to stuff I had primarily seen before, including new mini-bosses like this cool one in Uranus' stage where you're on a platform going back and forth with rocks dropping and you need to shoot the eyes. But while I'm on this one, is it just me, or does this thing up top look like the Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob? That's what it made me think of anyway. But this game has the most fun classic Mega Man special weapons I've used in a minute. Neptune gives you this water ball that decimates enemies in no time, and another guy gives you a weapon that draws health from enemies and restores yours, which was super useful. And there's a shield-destroying electric weapon, and the list goes on. The rocket punch was powerful, but it didn't compare to the special weapons, which is a much better balance than the charge shot in Game Boy 4 and some of the other classic Mega Man games where the weapons were pretty useless. Something that was in both Mega Man Game Boy 4 and 5 was the fact that weapon energy does not refill between stages, which is really stupid. The point of it is that you have to buy a full ammo refill from the shop. The weapons were so useless in the last game that I never paid it much mind though, but since they're so good here, I thought it was a needless restriction on my gameplay, since I had to buy the ammo restore, thus taking away my ability to buy other things like E-Tank and extra lives. Mega Man still has Rush Jet and Rush Coil in this game, but he also gets a new robotic companion exclusive to this game: Tango, a robotic cat. I think he's super adorable, but I never found a use for him throughout the whole game. I did try once though. Bless his heart, he's trying his best. I like how the Japanese art of Tango makes him look super cute and cuddly, but then the US box art is like, damn, he's pissed. But really though, at the end of the day, I thought this game was good. It took everything that worked about the previous one, like balanced levels and bosses and pacing and exploration, and put it all in a game that was completely new and original, thus making it really stand out from the rest of its Game Boy Mega Man brethren. I didn't think it was perfect. I hated the boss rush level, for example, because the stage makes you fight Anchor, Quint, Punk, and Ballad before refighting all 8 bosses from this game. If they just made the boss rush consist of the previous rivals from the Game Boy Mega Man games, that would have been cool. But doing both that and the standard boss rush from every other Mega Man game was way too much for one stage. And then the final boss was far too long and easy to die to. So by the end, I thought the game was kinda dragging its heels, but the journey there was a lot of fun. I've said it all for the previous games and I'll say it again. I don't think this is a must-play game where you gotta drop everything to play Mega Man 5 on Game Boy, but it also doesn't need to be that good to be a good game. It's restricted by the hardware it's on for sure, but in this game I see a real attempt to add new ideas and mechanics and characters to the world of Mega Man, an initiative I didn't really see in the previous games. If you're a Mega Man fan and have access to this game and haven't tried it, I see no reason why you shouldn't. It's a fun, well-designed action platformer. It is a good game. Not a whole lot more to it than that, but if you're only ever going to play one Mega Man game for the Game Boy, make sure it's this one. These Game Boy Mega Man games were pretty interesting to play through. As established, I'd never played any of them before. I was never as into classic Mega Man as I was the X series, so I never felt that compelled to play beyond the console classic series games. But now, after having played these, I'm glad I did. They were a unique bit of history and demonstrated the same kind of quality trajectory that the main series did in NES. Each one building on previous ones in small ways, but by the end you've got a totally different beast from where you started. Dr. Wily's Revenge and 2 are nothing to write home about. 3 and 4 were both decent Game Boy platformers, and we end on a game that really brought its own thing to the table, and I respect it a lot. I'm glad these games are having a resurgence in accessibility, because for a long time, if you didn't have the Game Boy carts, you weren't playing these. There was going to be a collection of all 5 of these games on the Game Boy Advance that was meant to coincide with the collection on consoles that contained all the console games, but it never got released. And then the games were on the 3DS eShop in the 2010s, but that was it. Now they're on the Nintendo Switch Online service for anyone who wants to easily play all 5 of them. And today, a fan developer is remaking the 5th one from scratch in the style of Mega Man 7, which should be very cool when it's done. Goes to show another reason why originality is king. People really vibe with Part 5 on Game Boy and want to see its ideas reach their full potential, when the rest are just alright to goodish alternatives to games that already existed. But that's not to take away from any of these games. Like I said, I'm glad I gave them all a playthrough because it was definitely worth it. But next up on my docket is all the rest. All the miscellaneous classic Mega Man games, ranging from the Game Gear one to the Wonder Swan one and arcades and everything in between. It's gonna be fun, I hope. But until that time comes, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.